If everyone could please take their places. That means you, Leisha. Apologies for running a few minutes late. We just wanted to give, because of the venue change, a few extra minutes. So thank you for your patience. We'll be finishing a few minutes late as well. So just to introduce myself and Flavia, I'm Susan, and Flavia is up at the door, and we are the organizers. And Central Institute of Technology is our sponsor who makes these nights possible. So on behalf of us, welcome. Last time I asked everyone if you were aware that Central has certificate and diploma programs on sustainability and whether or not you knew they could be used as a uni pathway. And a lot of you knew that, so I dug a little deeper and I tried to find some other information that might be interesting. Did you know Central Institute of Technology currently has a range of environmentally friendly, sustainable strategies and procedures in place across all their campuses? Did you know that? I just found that out this afternoon. They also have short programs on things like woodworking, in case you've got a little extra time on your hands. So who's excited? I'm excited. They gave me a microphone this time. How exciting, right? Pretty exciting. So just before I get started, some housekeeping. If we can put our mobile phones on silent. Silent. The loos are out the door you came in and around the corner, and there's also some down here. We're going to go out through that door later. We're going to allow about an hour for tonight's session. Each of our speakers will talk for 10 minutes, and then we're going to give them a warning bell, which this gentleman is going to let us know what it sounds like. Like a doorbell. And that's at 8 minutes, so they know they've got a couple of minutes to wrap up. And then from there we'll do some Q&A, which will be fun. And then we'll basically have some drinks and nibbles outside and just keep the conversation going. Hi, Simone. I didn't see you come in. Okay. Now, just a reminder, as always, that Perth Green Drinks is about conversation, it's about education, it's about community. So one of the things that's really important is that we respect each other's opinions. We all have different backgrounds, but we like to treat each other with respect in this forum. So please keep your comments succinct and constructive. Now, tonight we have 3 speakers I'm very excited to introduce. Jane is the chair of the Alliance for Clean Environment and the secretary for the National Toxics Network. That's Jane Bremmer. We also have Dr. George Crisp, who is a GP. He's also the WA chair of Doctors for the Environment Australia and the co-developer of Green Practice, which he'll tell you maybe a little bit more later. And last but not least, we have Diane Kane, who is the creator and owner of her own highly successful business providing products that are safe to use on our bodies. Those were the products in the door prize that you signed up for earlier. So without any further ado, I'd like to introduce Jane Bremmer. Jane Bremmer has been an environmental health and justice activist in Western Australia for 20 years. As chair of the Alliance for Clean Environment, a WA-based environmental health and justice NGO, she coordinates campaigns in the area of waste management, air quality, children's environmental health protection, pesticides, industrial pollution, and chemical regulation in Australia. Jane is also secretary for the National Toxics Network, which is Australia's peak toxics and pollution reduction NGO. Jane believes environmental health protection is vital for our survival and should underpin all government decision-making. As such, she works with global NGOs to eliminate persistent organic pollutants, or POPs, and raise our awareness about the profound impact pollutants have on the environment, in our homes, and in our air, water, and food, particularly with children and the unborn. So without any further ado, I give you Jane.
Well, I just want to start by saying thank you to Green Drinks for inviting me to speak about a topic that's really timely at the moment. The regulation of chemicals in Australia is currently under review, and that includes industrial chemicals, pesticides, herbicides. So it's a really important time to discuss some of these issues and to raise awareness in the community and hopefully get the public to think about the issues of chemicals in the environment and in their bodies and motivate people, hopefully, to act. Just a little bit about myself. I'm the chair of the Alliance for a Clean Environment. These are some of the campaigns and the issues that we're currently working on. I won't go through them. I'm just going to skip over this because I've only got 10 minutes, so I'm sorry if I sound a bit rushed. Some of our national and global networks. IPEN is a group of more than 700 international NGOs working to eliminate POPs, which are persistent organic pollutants. And the criteria for POPs means that they obviously are persistent in the environment, they bioaccumulate, and they have the ability to travel long distances in the air. And a number of these particular chemicals, you can see BFR, brominated flame retardants, perfluorinated chemicals, dioxins, lead, mercury, cadmium, these are all POPs. And this is a globally binding treaty that Australia's signatory to, called the Stockholm Convention, working towards eliminating these chemicals from the planet because they're here forever and they cause immense damage to the environment and public health. NTN also works with the Australian government on a number of committees. The Stockholm Convention Committee, electronic waste, which is a really big issue because of the brominated flame retardants that are involved in electronic waste, hazardous waste, of course, industrial chemicals, nanotechnology and pesticides regulation. The National Toxics Network have been one of the leading organisations in the eastern states working on coal seam gas. You might have heard about fracking. The chemicals that are involved in coal seam gas and fracking have largely been untested, and it was the National Toxics Network that brought that to the federal government's attention. Gaia is the Global Alliance for Incinerator Alternatives, and we work closely with Gaia, who are a participating IPEN NGO, to help eliminate dioxin, and dioxin largely comes from incinerators and waste-to-energy plants. So we work with these other NGOs to campaign against that, and that's a very timely campaign as well in Australia, particularly in Western Australia, because we've got about 4 incinerator and waste-to-energy plants in the pipeline, and there are more proposed for the eastern states. Global Community Monitors is a fantastic US-based organisation that helps. They're called fence-line communities. They're those communities that live close to industrial facilities that suffer pollution impacts, and Global Community Monitors helps these communities make their own bucket air monitors. They're cheap air monitors that grassroots can make to measure the air quality near to where they live without having to spend thousands and thousands of dollars to be on a level playing field with the very expensive chemical industry. What drives us to do what we do? Environmental justice is the principle behind what we do, and that's the principle that all people and communities are entitled to equal protection of public and environmental health. What you might not be aware of is that it's estimated that 1 in 3 of all occupational diseases are a result of exposure to hazardous chemicals. Chemicals are now picked up in human blood and breast milk, with Australia showing some of the highest levels in the world. Babies are born pre-polluted now, with more than 300 chemicals found in the meconium at birth. And we're talking about chemicals that weren't around 30 to 50 years ago. Okay, so the body burden of chemicals in our children is increasing. And so that means when they face perhaps a 70 to 80 year lifespan, they're already starting pre-polluted and they're at a disadvantage. So it's an intergenerational issue. Environmental monitoring consistently showing chemical residues extensively in the environment. Climate change is a big issue for chemical regulation because the persistent organic pollutants that I mentioned earlier have been locked into the polar ice caps. Now that they're melting, they're being re-released back into the environment. And hormone disruption is a big issue attached to the fossil fuel industry, and that's endocrine disruption, or you might have heard it called hormone mimicking chemicals. They're chemicals that affect the body at very low levels, at the levels of hormones. And some scientists, such as the wonderful Theo Colburn, has warned that hormone disruption is a more imminent threat to humanity than climate change. A big motivator for us is children's environmental health, and the reason I'm talking about children's environmental health is when chemicals are assessed, the regular assessment of a chemical is for a healthy 70-kilo male. Children are not little adults, they're not just going to be smaller versions of adults. They actually have undeveloped systems of toxics elimination. They're completely different, and chemical assessments don't account for the specific vulnerability of children. They're windows of development that can be impacted by chemicals, particularly hormone and endocrine disrupting chemicals. And their body burden's increasing. So our position is, if you can protect children's environmental health, you're protecting the planet the best way you possibly can. And we think that all legislation in relation to health and environmental protection should be driven by the protection for children's health. I just wanted to mention an example of neurotoxicity. This relates specifically to pesticides, but chemicals that are used in everyday products in the home contain neurotoxins, and this is some of the effects, just to demonstrate how significant the impacts of neurotoxins can be on children and their brain development. And this was a study that was done where the pesticide, in an area where pesticides are heavily used, and you can see that in the valley where the greatest exposure is, the impact on children was the greatest. How are we exposed to chemicals? Well, through our food, and that might be through additives, chemical additives in the food itself, or it could be through pesticide residues, because we allow a certain residue level of pesticides in our food. We get exposed to chemicals through our personal care products, consumer goods, through the environment, through the air that we breathe and the environment that we live, and of course medicines. The awful truth, I'm sorry to bring the awful truth to you, but in Australia we have a very complex, fragmented system of chemical regulation. The area that I work in mostly is industrial chemicals, and just to explain, the chemicals that are used in consumer products, in food, in pharmaceuticals, in herbicides, they're all the same group of chemicals. You'd be quite surprised to know that chemicals that are used for herbicides are also food additives, the same chemicals. So, oh my God, I'm going to have to fly through. Anyway, the awful truth is that we have an inventory in Australia. It's called the AIDS inventory, and there's about 40,000 chemicals on the inventory, and they haven't been assessed for human health and environmental impact. And I work very hard to convince the federal government to hurry that up. I'm going to flip through this because these are the agencies that are responsible for regulating chemicals. Industrial chemicals, it's nicknamed as APVMA, obviously herbicides and pesticides, Therapeutic Goods Administration, and the APVMA. Risk management is a major flaw because those agencies that assess the chemicals don't necessarily set the risk management. That goes down to the states, and that's often where things fall apart. There's some other regulatory risk managers there. I wanted to mention 3 chemicals which I'd like you to leave today and be concerned about and have on your radar. And the first one is triclosan. Triclosan is a hazardous substance. It's used extensively in consumer products, particularly hand washers. And the federal government in Australia hasn't set, or didn't set, any limits for the use of this chemical in consumer products when the rest of the world had, basically. It meets the criteria for a POP. It's coming out of our wastewater systems, both pre and post treated at levels that cause harm to the aquatic environment, extensively used in hand washes. And we're very concerned about it because since the swine flu epidemic, there's been a massive increase in the use of these antibacterial hand washes, even with the head of the AMA coming out recently saying that every child should be given a tube of their own. It's absolutely absurd. It's contributing to bacterial resistance. All these studies have been done. It's a chemical that has to go, and we're working really hard to get rid of it. Brominated flame retardants has to be one of the scandals of the century, claimed to reduce the incidence of things catching fire in our computers, our bedding, our cushions. It was banned on the Stockholm Convention 3 years ago. Australia still hasn't ratified that, and we have the highest levels in the world in human blood. If you'll just indulge me one more minute. Bisphenol A is another nasty. You might have heard about bisphenol A in babies' bottles. Australia only introduced a 12-month voluntary phase-out in babies' bottles, banned in many, many places in the world. That's another chemical that has to go. We don't need it, and it causes a big impact on human health in the long term. Nanomaterials, just very quickly, nanomaterials are an emerging issue of concern because they're so small, they pass through the normal defence mechanisms of the body, and nanomaterials are being used in consumer goods as well. I won't talk about risk assessment because I just want to quickly say that scientists, there's a lot of changes in science, and it used to be the mandate was that the dose sets the poison, and we know, and that's where you get that linear dose response, where you get the greater the dose, the greater the effect. What we know now is that not all chemicals behave that way, and that at the very, very low ends, see the curve there, at the very, very small end, we get high impacts, in the middle not so much, and obviously the larger the dose, we're still getting high chemicals. So the whole risk assessment, which I have to say is not a science, is fundamentally flawed, and there are big changes that aren't being reflected in terms of risk assessment in the assessment of chemicals for safety. Just a quick comment about safer solutions. Read the label. Reading the label is the most important thing you can do as a consumer. Get educated and understand what it is you're putting in your body, in your home, in your environment. Choose low chemical products. My motto is less is more. And get educated and act. And you can always join our organisation of the National Toxics Network if you want to know more. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Jane. That was a little bit scary, but I'm glad we indulged you to the end so that we could find out at least something we can do about that.